Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining today's breakfast briefing. We're going to kick off, and I'm going to start with a bit of an introduction, and I'll share some slides so we can discuss our latest report, which is part of our Clean Heat series and what we're hoping to discuss today. And it's a deep dive into the vast range of jobs and skills that are underpinning the transition towards electrified heat. So hope you can see the slides. Please let me know if you cannot. And just before we start, just wanted to let you all know that there is a Q&A function in Zoom, which is the best way to submit a question, which we'll be able to address towards the end of the session. And so, yeah, if instead of using the chat, you could use the Q&A, that would be great. So my name's Oscar Matthews. I'm on the policy team at Energi UK, and I focus on our skills policy work. And it's been a real pleasure to work on this report over the last few months. So I'm really excited to share it with you all. I wanted to start with some of the numbers, which are really important when talking about sort of, and get mentioned a lot. So in this table, you'll see some of the different projections and which give an indication of the scale of the opportunity in this sector. And it's clear that decarbonising heat is going to rely on the deployment of low carbon technologies, which are going to need people to manufacture, commission, install, and maintain these technologies. And I think a lot of the focus is often on installation roles, and these are in many ways the sort of frontline roles, which are going to be the face of the transition. But something we really wanted to focus on for this report is the broader ecosystem that underpins it all. There's so many, if anything, these are going to be sort of slight conservative estimates, because when you start to look into all the different indirect roles or supporting roles and just the whole broader landscape that surrounds clean heat technologies, there's just a real untapped economic opportunity we wanted to touch on. And it's really not about getting the exact numbers. We know they're going to depend on different factors, whether that's all the deployment assumptions, the share of different technologies. It's not about getting to that specific number, but just highlighting that there's going to be a vast expansion of people needed in the sector, and then focus on how we're going to get people in and build the workforce we need to deliver on the electrification of heat and this ambition. And it's clear there's also going to be a challenge, and this is something that headlines and newspapers are always going to be quick to pick up, as the coverage to our report showed. And, you know, in part, this is no surprise. There are serious concerns around workforce capacity to deliver on the ambition, whether that's 450,000 heat pump installations a year by 2030 or reaching 27 terawatts an hour of heat from heat networks by 2035. And we are really trying to capture the full range of technologies that are going to underpin this transition. But I'd actually think it's a bit more nuanced than maybe what some of these headlines are showing here. And what our report does is try to unpack some of these challenges and issues the sector faces in a bit more detail. So if we move on to the next slide, I think it's worth starting perhaps with a bit of a cliche, but I think it is fair to say that what our sector faces at the moment is a real chicken and egg problem. So high electricity costs are suppressing clean heat demand, and that in itself leads to weak investment in skills, as businesses lack that confidence and certainty to invest in growing their workforce. And that does mean that then we're going to be unprepared for when demand does kick in, whether that's through the full activation of all the support in the Warm Homes Plan, or hopefully when we move towards a world where we have a lower spark gap, that's going to ramp up demand for these technologies. But we also have some more specific issues that relate to the heat workforce. And and it's worth noting that, regardless of whether we were making this broader switch to low carbon heat or not, the heating workforce at the moment is nearing, in broad terms, the retirement age, and we need to think about how we're going to attract a new generation of entrants into the workforce, as well as upskill and retain the existing workforce for the coming decade. So that's the double challenge we're facing. But the key underlying problem really is that chronic lack of investment, which is something we touch on in the report as well. And it links to a sort of classic skills problem, really, that tension between industry and government in terms of who has to fund investment in skills and jobs. And, our potentially controversial view is that it's going to probably have to be a combination of both, and government and industry working together to overcome this challenge. So what do we need in order to reach our objectives? Well, what our report stresses is we're going to need a cohesive policy framework for skills, which incentivizes investment, but also addresses chronic funding shortages in education, training, and the broader system. These all stand in the way of a more sustained increase in training and recruitment. So our report does make a series of recommendations in the next slide, and they can sort of loosely be divided into 3 chunks. I think our first set focus more on the short term, the next 5 to 10-year window, and they're about how do we channel investment to where it is needed the most. So it's about supporting people on the one hand, take on the training of their choosing without incurring a loss of income and having the right incentives in place. But it's also about how do we build up our domestic supply chain and support manufacturing businesses as they make the most out of this opportunity. Our second set of asks is more around sector attraction and awareness, and make sure we are sharing information in the right way, which helps inform a smarter approach to skills development. And then if we move towards the final set, we're thinking about the future of the sector and focusing on building that future pipeline of talent. So whether that's ensuring schools are equipping the next generation to enter tools on careers, or tweaking and reforming the apprenticeship system so that this critical route is taken up by SMEs and smaller businesses who are currently facing real significant cost pressures. But look, every report has asks, and I do hope you agree with these or would like to discuss these further during the Q&A. But what I personally really enjoyed about this paper and helping to write it is that it's also a celebration of the talent that is already in the sector. So I'll just leave you with our final slide before we move on to the discussion. I really hope if you haven't read it already, you'll find the time to read our report, because you'll be able to find the full versions of some of these case studies shown here. And what I think they capture is why people love working in this sector and what it has to offer, whether that's the excitement of doing something new every day, embracing a new technology, working at the cutting edge of an emerging field. And I think it's another cliche potentially, but we do need to do a better job of linking policy conversations to the human experiences that underpin this story. So on that note, we'll move on to our panelists. Mm-hmm. So it's really a great collection of people. So I just wanted to start by thanking them, since they also played a big role in shaping this report. You might have already spotted in my slides Meg Bradley, who's an intermediate electrical engineer in the heat pump solutions team at Vital Energy. So we're really lucky to have her. We've also got Divya Dhupar, who's on the external affairs and is a policy manager as well at Vaillant Group. So she can talk about that intersection between policy and industry from the business perspective of Vaillant. And finally, we have Chris Galpin, who's an energy policy expert, currently working at the climate think tank E3G, but also had 5 years experience working for UK government. So I hope we get that broad diversity of viewpoint. So I'm going to start with you, Meg, and I just wanted to ask, as someone who's joined the sector relatively recently, what's been your experience since you joined? How have things changed in the last 3 or so years, and what are some of the key trends you're noticing at Vital Energy?
So I've been working in the heat pump sector for roughly 6 years now. In the early start of my career, it was definitely more on the refrigeration side and a little bit of heat pumps, because we started with involvement in manufacturing of heat pumps. But then more recently, I've been more heavily involved in the design and application of heat pumps. And to be honest, it's been really fascinating to see how quickly the industry has evolved during that time. 6 years is a very short time, to be honest. And because the sector brings together such a amazing group of different disciplines, you're constantly learning from loads of different people and seeing new approaches to things. And I think it's a really great, innovative sector to work in. One of the biggest trends that I definitely think we've all seen is the move towards natural refrigerants with and refrigerants with a lower global warming potential being used. And obviously this helps reduce the environmental impact of the heat pump technology even further. We've also seen a lot of heat pumps that have been adopted into a much wider range of applications. So I've worked on projects where heat pumps have been installed in hospitals and universities where like this sort of technology can make a significant difference to both like the carbon emissions and the energy efficiency. But there's definitely a growing focus across the industry on like sustainability and finding practical ways to support net zero goals. And heat pumps are definitely playing like a key role in that, I think.
Thank you. Thanks, Meg. And
So
just in picking up on that, Divya, what role do you think then government is playing in supporting industry as it undergoes this transformation? So we've recently had the Warm Homes Plan, which sort of looms in the background to a lot of recent conversations, but it seems like this sector's undergoing transformative change and government is on board with this. But how has that support looked like so far, specifically also from more of a workforce, jobs and skills perspective?
No, definitely. So I think we've been talking about heat pumps for quite some time. So we've been talking about them from 2019, 20, when we had the Boris Johnson 10-point plan launched. But unfortunately, at that point of time, there was a lot of stop policy. But, when we think about where we are today, we've had the industrial strategy celebrate its 1 year anniversary recently. Industrial strategy identified heat pumps as a frontier sector for economic growth. On the back of that, we've also had the publication of the Warm Homes Plan, which is a £15 billion commitment from government towards the clean heat transition. And there is a very big ambition for 450,000 heat pumps to be installed by 2030. So we're in a place where we now have that long-term strategy. Alongside that, we have a really good mix of supply and demand side policy levers as well. So we've had the extension and very recent uplift to the boiler upgrade scheme. There's been the extension to the heat training grant, so installers can upskill up until 2029. And we've also have the publication of the Future Home Standard, which is going to go live towards the latter part of this decade, making sure more new homes are going to be built with default low carbon technologies. So now we're in a really interesting place where government is not just funding specific technologies, but they're looking at it really holistically. And from us at Vaillant, government is really identifying what can be done for that sustained consumer demand, what can be done to make UK manufacturing more competitive, and what can be done for workforce and skills. So a combination of all three pillars working together is really what's going to bring that 15,000 18,000 heat pump jobs by 2030 as an ambition into reality.
And do you think then with these policies you're acquiring that certainty or that support that you need, either Vaillant or across your supply chain, to make those longer term investments in jobs and skills?
Yeah, policy certainty, I would say, for us as a business and for the entire industry is so critical. We can't have, unfortunately, stop start. We really need that long-term certainty. And it's really good to see government thinking so holistically. Like I said, it's going back to those three pillars working together: sustained consumer demand, competitive UK manufacturing, and investment in workforce and skills.
Thanks, Divya. And Chris, just moving on then, so it's great to see that there is some positive change in the right direction, but sort of Divya has noted that it hasn't always been like this, and I think this is a sector that's been sort of used to stop-start approaches at times that have quite a destabilizing effect on businesses. So could you touch from your experience, both in government, but more broadly, what are some of these challenges that have meant that progress has not always been linear, and maybe how do these stumbles on the road have lead to a kind of a stop start or less positive investment patterns when it comes to the workforce and building resilience there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as Divya said, I think there's a kind of strong policy foundation here, but definitely there have been bumps along the road and plenty more to do. I think it's really helpful to look at this from the perspective of, what a typical business in the heating sector looks like, which is, they're a small business. Many of them are sole traders. Vast majority have fewer than 10 employees. And probably many of them are doing quite well doing what they're doing currently, right? So I think that is, the bar that policy needs to cross here is to make a compelling argument to those businesses who are doing quite well and are quite small c conservative in terms of this is their livelihood, so they're not taking decisions lightly. And, I mean, you touched on this earlier, but the things that they need to see to be persuaded to diversify their business into heat pumps is consumer demand, but also in terms of the workforce journey, like an unobstructive path for them to diversify. So, I mean, you talked already about, high electricity costs are by far the biggest barrier to demand. And I think we should, be clear that that is like the single largest barrier to all of this. I think, as you've kind of alluded to, that the challenge with the stop-start policy support in the past is, if you are a small business and you go all in on setting up your business to deliver on one of these government policy schemes, and then the rug is pulled out from under you, then unfortunately we have kind of created a culture of natural selection where we select against the type of businesses that are willing to take the risk on this stuff. And I mean, that has had a very serious impact on people's livelihoods. And I think we need to be really wary of that. That like all of these changes and schemes are really important to the people working in this sector. Yeah, so as I said, I mean, we need to create that confidence in demand, hopefully going beyond just government schemes, and also creating the kind of conditions for like the sustained self-sustaining sector. And we need to tackle all the practical stuff, right? That if you're a business of that size, you need to know where the clear training opportunities are. You need to convince your employees it's going to be good for them. You need to know how to find an apprentice, be able to find an apprenticeship standard that works for you and a college that can offer it, and things like that. So yeah, so as I said, strong foundations, but plenty more to do, definitely.
Thanks, Chris. And just sticking with you, do you get the sense the government is doing some of that thinking? Because in the Warm Homes Plan, one of the bodies that was set up was the Warm Homes Workforce Task Force, which you're a part of, and Energy actually also sits on as well. So I was just wondering if you could give a sense of where do you think current government thinking is when it comes to tackling these broader structural workforce issues. I actually think it is interesting that we have a workforce task force in the first place. It's not something I think you would have seen maybe from the last government in the last few years. So it does seem to be a change in approach or tone at least. So what have your reflections been from taking part in that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And you're right to say, I think it is quite a groundbreaking structure. I mean, I'm sure many of us will have views on, there's always a whole plethora of government task forces, but I do think this one is genuinely quite transformational and comes after many years of a kind of lack of skills planning in any kind of central way. So the task force is co-chaired between government and the Trade Unions Congress, and it brings together government, trade unions, businesses, local government, civil society to look at these problems. And it kicked off earlier this year, so it's not quite at the stage to have final recommendations yet. But some of the things it's looking at are job quality. So how can we provide reassurance that the jobs created in this sector are going to be as good, if not better, than jobs that already exist in the sector. Is looking at things like training routes and how we can streamline and improve those. But I think almost one of the most interesting topics it's looking at is that piece we just touched on about resilience. So how can we make the sector more resilient to fluctuations in government funding, and particularly by doing that by building greater integration with like the wider built environment sector. So we're no longer saying this is the clean heat sector, it sits over here on its own, and here's what was before, but we're creating an integrated heat sector that continues to do the existing technologies while it still needs to do those, but also brings the whole workforce with us on the clean heat journey.
Thanks, Chris. No, yeah, that's really helpful, and definitely agree on the importance of that resilience piece. You also mentioned training routes, and I feel like a big part of this story is also how we are harnessing to talk the existing workforce and all the heating engineers already in the market, and support them to take up new types of training to be able to work with technologies they might not have been as familiar with and benefit from this transition. So I wanted to turn to you, Divya, and just ask about how Vaillant is approaching this shift and supporting people making it, and it's not just from an installation perspective. I know also from the manufacturing side how you made that switch from manufacturing gas boilers to increasing share of heat pumps, for example.
Yeah, definitely. So, early policy signals did indicate to us that there is going to be this gradual shift from gas boilers to heat pumps, and we wanted to make sure that our consumers had a full range of solutions that were available to them manufactured in the UK. And that's why in 2021, we launched our heat pump line at Belper, Derbyshire. Last year, we also inaugurated our cylinder line, which is located in Derby. Now, to support the existing workforce, we have 6 centers of excellence, which are essentially our training centers. They're located across the country. We also have strategic partnerships with colleges. We have the capacity to train up to 20,000 installers annually, should the demand be there. And I can confidently say now that 70% of the training that we are offering at our centers of excellence or through our college partnerships is primarily focused on heat pump training. So that's a really positive message for industry. You may have seen that on the 2nd of July, we did launch another college partnership with Brighton Med. Definitely keep an eye out. We do have a few more coming online this year. So this is kind of what we're doing for the existing workforce. Now, a big part of our strategy at the moment is also supporting young talent and making sure there's a vast pool of young talent entering industry. So in 2023, we launched a low carbon heating technician apprentice, which was a collaboration with our strategic partner, Derby College. And it's a 3-year course. They spend some time with us, they spend some time at college. And then when you install a heat pump, you do require a multifaceted skill set. So we did bolt on additional modules to the course, such as plumbing, bricklaying, electrics, and customer service, to ensure that the individual that went out there had the full holistic skill set and confidence to be able to install a heat pump. We had our second cohort in September 25, and we do have our third cohort coming online very soon. So I think from us as a business, it's not only about investing in the existing workforce, but it's also about ensuring, like I said, that vast talent of individuals is there within industry to be able to support the ambitions of the Warm Homes Plan.
Thank you. And I want to touch back on that partnership with Derby College and some of the other ones you've been working with, but quickly wanted to go to Meg first to just get your reflections on some of the discussions so far, and especially you touched on this at the start, how you sort of experienced firsthand that change in sort of the type of refrigerants used, the broader range of applications of the technologies we're using, but just wanted to see how conversations so far had timed with you, and if it kind of reflects your experience, and also more important perhaps, what drives you then in it, given this sort of, we've heard the context, we've heard what's happening in policy terms, but more from your perspective, what's it like when you're sort of getting up every morning and sort of jumping into work? What's driving you, and how are you sort of experiencing some of these broader shifts?
Yeah, so when I entered the sector, honestly, it was like really daunting to start with. I'm sure many of you felt it, but there are so many areas of expertise that you can go into, and like so much knowledge to unlock, and like different skills to learn and stuff, which is what makes it super exciting as well. Like there's so much that you can do and you can go into and that can be done. And we are always improving our technology and coming up with new innovative ideas. So like being a part of that is all really exciting. For me, like I find it really rewarding knowing that the work that I have has a positive impact. Like heat pumps help reduce carbon emissions and support a more sustainable future. So it's really rewarding to work on projects that genuinely make a difference. And it's exciting to be a part of an industry that's developing new technologies and solutions all the time. Being involved in that sort of innovation and knowing you play a small part in that, in like shaping a better future, is incredibly rewarding.
And I mean, we touched on some of the work Divya mentioned their partnerships with colleges to deliver the low carbon heating technician apprenticeship. The apprenticeships are sort of seen by many as the gold standard entry route into this sector. And there's a lot of discussion around what's working, what isn't working with their current delivery and system. But I wanted to get a few more reflections from you, if that's okay, just on what that pathway has looked like from your perspective. How did you find out about it in the first place, and what have you, and you've touched on some of what you enjoy, but other areas where you feel like the pathway could be clearer or smoother, or any room for improvement in that experience for you, or how would you pitch it to other people who might be thinking about following that route?
Yeah. So I completed my apprenticeship just a couple of years ago and my HNC just last year. So like I'm fresh out of it, like completely just experienced it all. But I think apprenticeships, as you said, are one of the best routes into the industry. It's so valuable to get that sort of experience early on, and learning off people within the industry that have so much knowledge to share is a really great way to get into it. And I know I found my own experience to be really valuable to me. Like I learned a lot very quickly and really enjoyed jumping like straight into the deep end. And I would definitely like recommend it to anyone I knew. Like one thing I'd definitely like to see is greater awareness of the opportunities available like through apprenticeships. Obviously you guys have like spoken about it, and there is more of a push anyway. But when I started my apprenticeship, I only really knew about it because of my dad. He's an engineer as well, and he followed a very similar route. But without him, like I don't think I would have known that that was such a good option for me to have. He took me to like various open days, whereas like the school that I was at, they mostly spoke about going to college and university, and that's sort of the route they try and push you down, where I think we're sort of more leaning towards letting people know early on what's available to them. Like you can go to college and you can go to an apprenticeship and you can make your way up to uni, and you can do it in various different pathways as well. Like I know plenty of people who started in an apprenticeship and then went on to be a degree apprentice. And I think it's really important that the younger generation have a full understanding of what opportunities are available to them, the different paths that they can take on their way to joining the workforce. And I definitely think this is like you said, it's definitely improving already. More companies and training providers are now engaging with schools, attending like career events and hosting open days to like showcase what is available to these people.
No, thank you. That's really, really helpful. And actually, just on that, is that something you mentioned your partnership with Derby College, and there is that awareness issue? We know the government struggled to get significant take up at first for the low carbon heating technician apprenticeship. So I was just wondering if you could talk a bit more about that collaboration with Derby College, and whether it's sort of it reflects what Meg's just shared. And I couldn't help but have also a quick peek at the Q&A, and someone was also asking about that piece around connecting industry and college training providers, and how do you ensure that partnership works best. So there might be something you can share there that's hopefully helpful.
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, the apprenticeship we did with Derby College is a strategic partnership. It was the first of its kind within the UK, and we launched it in 23. As I mentioned, we bolted on additional courses to the apprenticeship to make sure there was the individual at the end of the day who finished the apprenticeship was well-rounded and had all the skills that were needed to install a heat pump. Because unfortunately, when we think about the heating sector, it's very siloed. So you have heating, you have plumbing, you have electric. But to install a heat pump, you need to have all these skills come together to be able to do it successfully. And just to build on what Meg has said, in terms of the challenges that we've faced is awareness and scale. So there aren't as many colleges or businesses doing what we do out there, and we definitely need a lot more to meet that 18,000 individuals within industry by 2030. The second thing we see is, again, just building on what Meg said, is doing an apprenticeship does result in a lucrative career. Unfortunately, it's still the view, you go to university, you get a job, and that's how you're going to have a good life. But that's not really the case. We have 100% retention rate with our third-year apprentices, and we found that they're learning on the job, they're earning, and they're being treated well, which means they're going to stay in the industry and they're going to have a rewarding career for life. And the last thing that we found challenging as well is also the awareness amongst installers, I would say. So, for example, since the apprentices are being paid by us, we call up our installers and say, would you like to take an apprentice on? It's free labor. And they're like, really? They get really, really concerned that, oh my God, why are you providing us free labor? What's going on here? So it's just, again, it's the whole piece of, awareness, and just, of having awareness, knowing that this is happening. It's a lucrative career. It's a well-paying job, and it's a good life. So I think it's about that message getting out there.
Yeah, no, and I definitely think awareness is a key issue facing apprentices, but at the same time I think we are starting to see a bit of a change, and increasing numbers of people would like to take on follow that path, but then sometimes the other barrier they'll then face is a lot of businesses, and as the profile Chris was mentioning at the start, who might be smaller, are struggling to then take on an apprentice. So the challenge might be more on the other side there. So I wanted to turn to you, Chris, and ask if you could sort of touch a bit more on that, and maybe what then is the role of government in supporting these smaller businesses and the sole traders and the micro businesses in the sector take on more apprentices, if the challenge for them is cost, or at least a sense that there's still not that long-term certainty needed to take on someone for that period of time, because it's something we've been hearing a lot and slightly concerned about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for those small businesses, the big concerns are risk, and there's a scalability aspect as well. And I think it's one thing for a Treasury official in Whitehall to say, well, we've crunched the numbers and it makes sense for a business to take on an apprentice. It's very different if you are a one-person outfit existing on fine margins, and there is a degree of you might hire a fantastic apprentice and you might be really grateful for it, but you might also hire someone who you don't get on very well with, and so there's a whole degree of kind of personal risk that is going into this that I think needs to be factored in. And there is a role for government in supporting businesses to overcome that risk. And also, as I said, a scale aspect, which kind of comes along on a bit of a chicken and egg of a local training college probably only wants to run a course if there's a certain level of demand. You as an individual business may not be able to provide that level of demand, but as an aggregate of multiple businesses, you could. And I think the answer to that is very much looking at schemes like the one that Divya has spoken about, that Vaillant are involved in. But I think government has a role in scaling that up, and enabling that to be offered more broadly. And I think definitely as well, there's a role for government to look at the funding, particularly available to small businesses, and explore how that can help de-risk some of this as well. But I think some of the things that we've touched on in the scheme Divya was talking about, so giving an opportunity for businesses to trial apprentices at lower cost to the business is always going to help. A degree of kind of centralized support in managing the kind of human resources function, I guess, associated with taking on an apprentice is always going to help. And I think they also provide that kind of aggregate scale question, and mediate the certainty between the training provider and the employer that there is going to be enough demand to justify running a course, and it's worth the investment in setting up the facilities and hiring the teaching staff and things like that. So I think the ingredients for that solution are set out by the scheme we just talked about, but government needs to take that role and say, right, how do we make this a nationwide scheme and scale it up?
Thanks, Chris. And I think as we near sort of the end of the discussion, I think it is probably now and never time to start focusing really on what we should be then coming together to ask government for, to help businesses or navigate the coming years. And I think there is a lot of some good foundations, but there are definitely still challenges that they're going to need to overcome. So I'll start with you, Divya. How do you think we create that the ideal policy environment that's going to support businesses to invest? Because especially I think the closure of eco has had sort of concerning impacts on that supply chain, and I think it's leading to some of these issues and pressures that Chris mentioned. So I'd be keen to get your thoughts on where government needs to go next and how to ensure all the Warm Homes Plan continues to stay relevant and drive progress.
I think for me, and as someone who sits in policy day in and day out, it's about having that long-term certainty and that stable policy and regulation to be able to invest within the UK. And when I think about that further, I look at it at least when I think about it further, and when I'm thinking about the work we do at Vaillant, I look at it through three pillars. So first would be sustained consumer demand. So we do have a good mix of demand side policy levers at the moment. We also have the Warm Homes loan scheme coming online in September. So that's really positive. But we also really need to address the disparity between gas to electricity prices to make heat pumps the economic choice for consumers. And we can't have the stop-start policy. So last year, ECO accounted for a third of all heat pump installations within the UK, and this year that's gone. So we can't have that stop-start policy. Long-term policy certainty is needed, especially on the consumer side. From the manufacturing perspective, again, we need stable regulation, support and incentives for UK manufacturing, and definitely a big one is alignment with the EU. So we have the CBAM coming online next year. We have steel import tariffs. There's also questions going around about the EU industrial accelerator. So it's just about, as a pan-European business, it would be nice to understand and have that, that alignment with the EU. And I think the third one for me would be workforce and investment in installers in the industry. So we do have the heat training grant, which is really positive, but it would also be nice if there could be a loan scheme available to installers every time they go and upskill, because we know when they go and upskill, they are away from the trade and they are losing money. So that would be a really nice ask to have as well. But at the same time, we also need to be thinking about the existing workforce, but as well as that future pipeline. So it's about making sure all these three pillars are working together, and we have started to see it from government, see that long-term holistic thinking for industry.
Thanks, Davey. And really interesting that you say, I seem to remember there was an ask in our report around a loan scheme to support installers on top of the heat training grants. That's good to hear. But just touching on the heat training grant and installation, and turning to Chris, a few weeks ago, it was actually, I think, the day we published the report, Desna's published the mid-scheme review of the heat training grant, and it showed that 67% of respondents to the survey had said they'd not installed any heat pumps since completing heat training grant subsidised training 1 year onwards. So I think there's an issue there, and I just wanted to get your thoughts and sort of building on some of the points Divya's outlined. How do we support then more training? Because we can train people and we can train as many people as we want, but if there's a gap between them becoming active participants in the workforce, there is a challenge there. And I know organisations like Nest are doing some really good work in this space around providing a source with that confidence and supporting them. But I think it's a broader piece of work. So I'd be interested to get your thoughts on that gap.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there are two issues here. I mean, one is frictional issues in terms of, okay, you've done the training, but what next? Some of which I think is to do with the pace at which we can get people certified and through all the necessary standards. Part of which is a psychological thing of it's one thing to do the training, but to actually go to a paying customer and sell them something and be confident you're going to do a good job is a little bit scary. I'm not sure how many installers would admit that, but it is. I think you mentioned the work that Nesta are doing. I think the Start at Home scheme, which supports heating installers to do their first heat pump installation in their own home, is an absolutely fantastic response to that kind of psychological barrier. But I mean, so there are those frictional issues, but actually I think that it highlights that the biggest challenge here really is consumer demand. If we were absolutely bowled over by consumer demand, you would be seeing a lot more installers doing that training, crossing those barriers and going on to install. And the single top ask in that space, which I mean you mentioned earlier, is to reduce the cost of electricity which is unfortunately still quite inflated by taxes and things like that are all very much in government's control. So that's the thing. I think there's plenty of work we can do on the frictional issues, but actually, if government wants to solve that problem of training going on to lead to installations, then demand is the number one challenge.
Yeah, definitely agree. Okay, Meg, I think we're gonna finish on you then, and I mean, hopefully it'll be a more hopeful note. But just looking towards the future, how do you think we can then help increase awareness amongst new entrants and overall boost the visibility of the sector and make it a more inclusive place to work in, also so that once we do get that demand piece sorted, as many people as possible will want to work in heat and deliver on the electrification of the heating sector?
Yeah, so I think as we've all touched on it throughout, I think we've already made really great progress in improving both awareness and inclusivity, but always there is going to be more that we can still do. And I think we need to continue engaging with schools, colleges, universities to show young people the opportunities available within the energy sector and the impact that they can have throughout their careers. Offering opportunities for work experience and apprenticeship, as these are some of the best ways to experience it and get into the sector. And of course, we should continue using social media platforms to show what's happening in the sector and the way that people can get involved. Not just LinkedIn, but also on platforms that the younger generation are more likely to be using already, such as Instagram. Something I think that the industry is already really good at is sharing success stories and celebrating the people who have worked really hard and had a good impact. This is definitely a great way of encouraging people and highlighting all the good that is done within the sector. And I think representation matters as well, celebrating success stories of women or anyone else who is underrepresented definitely helps see that there's a place for everyone in the industry. And ultimately, the more that we can show people the variety of careers available, the innovation that's happening across the sector, and the positive impact that the work has on society and the environment, the more successful we'll be in attracting the next generation of talent. We want to inspire as many people as possible to come work in the sector. So we're always working hard to do everything and get these people in.
Thanks, Meg. And I think it's so interesting what you said about Instagram, actually, because I do think, as someone who sort of spends probably too much time on LinkedIn sometimes, I do feel like we're at the risk of sort of saying all the right things but to each other. So there's definitely something there around, and I know Vital do good work in the comms space if around pushing the message to a broader audience that won't be on LinkedIn to start with and would like to find out about these opportunities. So anyway, that's interesting. Well, thanks so much, Meg. I think those are all the questions I wanted to cover, and I think it's only fair we open it up to everyone else. So we've got the Q&A and there's a few questions there already, so I'll start going through those and delegating. The first one's from Luke, and we did touch on it. I think it's probably one for you, Divya. We did touch on it a bit, but I just wanted to make sure we fully covered it in case there's anything else we could add here in terms of what can we do to have a better join up between industry and colleges and training providers, since that is seen as a big challenge as well. So I don't know, but also Chris or Meg, if you want to jump in and take that one, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, I'm happy to say a bit about that. I think making it so like I said, when I was going out there, I had to search for what I wanted, where I think what we want to do now is definitely make it so it's offered and presented to them right in front of their faces, so it's hard to miss as an opportunity. As we said before, it's definitely something that's happening already, but something that we want to do more. I think the training centre that I used to go to and now been going out to schools themselves and doing this big presentation so that people know that it's available to them.
Great, thank you. Let's move on to Anna's question. I think, Divya, this might be one for you, but I'm sure it's something that's on all of our minds. But have you seen demand for air source heat pumps that provide cooling going up due to recent heat waves? Is this a space, an area you're looking at?
In terms of air source heat pumps, I think, within the boiler upgrade scheme, there's also been funding been allocated to air source heat pumps. If I'm not wrong, I think it's 2,500. So I think that is definitely going to be able to stimulate the market for air source heat pumps within the UK.
The air to air ones, yeah. Great. Meg, again, start of the show. Are there enough apprenticeships out there, or does it depend on where you live? What do you feel like there's a regional aspect to this?
It's kind of hard to answer because where I live locally, I was really lucky. I had two places I could go to, and I was right in the centre of it all. I definitely think you are going to get an increase in opportunity when you're like closer to cities or like larger towns and stuff. But I think if you go digging far enough, there's always ways you can find somewhere, even if you don't go through a classic route of like a training centre or like going through college first. If you go out looking for businesses, a lot of them advertise it like low key, especially if it's just like work experience, because you can always start there and turn that into more. But I definitely think it's a hard one to answer because I'm quite lucky being like quite close to two big ones. But you're definitely able, no matter where you are, I think if you search hard enough, you'd find something.
Yeah. No, but it is interesting and something we've been looking at a bit. That concern around whether there is sometimes a bit of a postcode lottery, and it's going to depend on whether the college in your area has all the right resources or there's enough demand to deliver that kind of training. And I think there's almost a broader point there, as with a potential change in leadership and the move towards more devolution at the skills level. You might get that more for piecemeal structure where it depends on the area you live, what funding is available for skills, what colleges are able to access, and we've had the launch of the 5 technical excellence colleges a few months ago that was meant to sort of help tackle this through the hub and spoke model. But Chris, I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. Do you feel like this? How do you deal with that kind of geography to the training and apprenticeship provision landscape? Is that a factor you think plays a role as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really interesting problem because you've got this, effectively like emerging markets, but the markets are all hyper localized as well in many cases. So absolutely, the geography is an issue. I think more local coordination needs to play a role in that, and kind of, as has been touched on earlier, kind of greater aggregation of some body, whether that's local authority or another organization, taking a bit more of a coordinating role to say, look, we've got all these small businesses that could take on apprentices. How can we package that up in a way that gives confidence to a training provider to make that investment in running the course?
Yeah. Okay, I'm just going to move on because there's actually a few. Divya, this one's definitely for you. Is government supply chain policy sufficient to enable investment in domestic manufacturing? And related question: are heat pump manufacturers going to get BICS relief, the British Industrial Competitiveness Scheme?
Yeah, so I'll answer the first part. Is what government doing sufficient? So we've had the industrial strategy. Heat pumps have been identified as a frontier sector for economic growth. From there on, within the warm homes plan, we've had round 2 of the heat pump industrial accelerator. We also have 90 million pounds from the heat pump ready competition there. And there is a lot that's being done at the moment. But for me, what's key is making sure that alignment is there with the EU at the same time, because there are a lot of businesses like us that are pan-European. On the BICS one, I am not sure, but I can get back to you on that.
Yeah. No, I know there was a bit, it wasn't entirely clear, but and on the manufacturing, and I don't know if everyone's aware, but there is that big target, isn't there, Divya, 70% of domestic manufacturing by 2035. So I think it's ambitious, but there's some.
Yeah, no, I think that's really great. Within the warm homes plan, there is this broader ambition of 70% of heat pumps to be installed within the UK by 2035. But we do need a bit more detail from government on what that actually means.
Yeah. Thanks. Charlotte said not enough businesses are hosting apprenticeships. Do you think there needs to be more support for businesses to take them on? Yes. But would anyone want to add to that? Because I think it's definitely an area we're looking at. Chris, maybe, or how can that support look like? Because I think on the one hand, there's calls for greater flexibility, and there is this kind of in England, at least, the apprenticeship levy is turning into the growth and skills levy, which is supporting employers fund foundation apprenticeships, which are meant to provide that kind of pre-apprenticeship start, or apprenticeship units, which are meant to be smaller, more modular courses that can help with upskilling. But I think, and there are also DWPs launching these incentive payments for SME, well, non-levy payers, around £2,000, but also if they there's a few, it can be more than £2,000. But I think if you take stock of the full cost of an apprentice across 4 years, it's still a considerable investment. So without preempting your answer, Chris, I feel like from our perspective, at least, there's more that needs to be done, but it's not. It could take it could take different forms, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a pretty good summary, to be honest, of more support is needed. It could take different forms. Particular, I think, supporting the small businesses to manage that kind of risk perception is the key part from my perspective. And as you mentioned, I think the funding, additional funding support for non-levy businesses is a part of that. As I said, I do think there's probably a role here as well for strengthening, where it's public money that's going into this, working out how in a light touch way we can use that to encourage businesses to at least consider offering apprenticeships. I mean, when it comes to larger businesses, I'm probably a bit more gung ho about saying, well, look, if you're getting a big public contract, you should take on a certain number of apprentices, and that's fine. With the smaller businesses, I think it probably needs to be a little bit more careful, because there are nuances there, and we don't want to put off small businesses participating in those kind of contracts. But I definitely think there is something to be done there to say, well, look, if you're winning this public contract, how about we take whether you're interested in taking on an apprentice, and maybe we help you to take one on if you've said yes, that kind of thing. So I think there definitely is more that can be done there as well, not just on the funding, but on the how do we convene different interests in this space and coordinate.
And just staying with you, Chris, we've got a bit of a spicy question from Oliver around the challenges small businesses are facing, moving from fossil fuels to heat pumps, and the broader skill sets that are required. So what is then the role for sole traders and micro businesses in the future? Are we moving towards a world where larger players are going to be taking on most of the work, or is there still room for both, or how do we kind of navigate that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously this is there'll be different views across the sector on this. So this is just my opinion, but I personally feel quite strongly that there will be a role for sole traders and micro businesses. Partly that comes from a perspective of, I think there is a valuable role they can play in the sector. But more pragmatically, I also think if you look at the makeup of the sector as it is now, which is over 95% micro and business and sole trader, I just don't really see a future where that stops being the case completely. So I think there is a huge role for them. I think I suspect some of the larger players will increase their market share as we make the transition, just because they've been quicker out the blocks in many cases. But no, I definitely think there is a role for sole traders and micro businesses, and we should recognise as well that for much of the workforce, that's part of the appeal of this sector, is the independence and the benefits that come with being a small business. As I've spent a lot of time talking about today, it comes with risks and challenges as well. But that shouldn't detract from the fact that for a lot of people that is kind of a badge of pride and something they're very proud of. So yeah, I absolutely think there is a role for the smaller businesses in this future.
Is there anything you'd like to add, Divya or Meg, or I'll move on? There's a couple more. Yeah. Okay. There's a few more, and I don't want to shy one. I'll go to the ones I feel like we haven't addressed more. There's one around whether we feel that the relative low apprenticeship wages are a barrier to increasing the workforce. Is there anything that can be done about this? There's also, I think, interesting one because there have been increases to the minimum apprenticeship wage over the years, but maybe I'd be interested to hear from Meg what if that's still seen as sort of a disadvantage to obviously the non-apprenticeship minimum wage or the barriers there. We've also heard that for a lot of these roles, because these are quite specialized technical roles, once you do go through apprenticeship, these are sort of good, fairly well paid roles that are actually, especially if you're looking at sort of areas like heat networks where there's just a real competition for talent. Businesses that sort of are incentivized to spend on their workforce to retain them, but it's true, as Chris said, it's a fragmented sector and it won't always be the case. So it is, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on what that's.
Yeah. So I actually joined my apprenticeship when I was 16. So it was really a barrier for me because knowing that I was going to be learning at the same time that I was earning, it was great. Like, even if that was on the lower scale, like I'd already had a part-time job on the weekends just to get some extra pocket money. But knowing that I could drop that and go straight into this, be learning to do what I wanted to do in the future, whilst also like earning a little bit, it was really good for me. I definitely think where it becomes more of a problem is the older people who come into apprenticeships, because apprenticeships aren't just for the people coming out of high school or coming out of college or university. It's for older people as well who want to take a different direction in their career. So I think this would pose more of a problem for them, and I do wonder what support can be given to them to make it better. But for me, it was never really a problem. I definitely think, like, I know that if you go down that sort of route, you can start out really low, but knowing that I could earn such a high wage in my future if I did really well was definitely an appeal in itself. So yeah.
Thanks. No, that's really interesting. Chris, David, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah. Very briefly, because I'm aware, I think this is a really difficult challenge, and it's one that I think we probably could spend another hour discussing. I think, as we've just heard, for some people it isn't a barrier, for some people it is, and I think definitely in the wider context of, it needs to be considered in the wider context of the challenges of non-employment educational training numbers that we're seeing now. I think I would probably say it is a barrier, and I think particularly it's probably a barrier to some groups of people who can't who need to be able to support themselves to get into the sector, even if they do have the prospects of earning more in the future. I think the challenge is that it's not like the employers are sitting on huge sacks of money either that they can, that they're just refusing to hand out. So I think it's a barrier, but there's a
Great. I think we slightly lost you there at the very end, Chris, but we're almost finished. I did want to quickly touch on, David, your question just we're at the very end, but just to say that in our report, we definitely, I know these conversations end up being quite heat pump focused, but we sort of recognize a broad range of different low carbon technologies are going to play a role in heat decarb. And we also actually, one of our case studies works in thermal storage. And so I hope you find the report useful in that sense. But you raised a broader set of points around the kind of the deliverability and the complexity around these installations, which we might not have time to go into detail. But just to say that yes, it is a challenge, and I think that's why initiatives also like the Future Home Standard are going to be sort of really important, just in the long term for new home builds, where we will be able to sort of get it right from the get-go and have to face less of the kind of these retrofit barriers, which I think the whole sector is all currently navigating. So sort of just acknowledging, and not sure if Chris or Divya, you'd seen that comment or wanted to add anything to that.
I mean, I could just really quickly, I'm conscious we're out of time. One thing I think industry has been talking about is when an installer goes in to service a customer's boiler, that could be a really good trigger point for them to, speak to the consumer about, the state and the health of their heating system, and potentially, if there is scope for an upgrade, which is low carbon, that could be a really good conversation with the customer. And other thing I did see is with the Warm Homes Agency going live, I think next year, installers and consumers can go to the agency, and that would be that single point of truth for them. So they do have that impartial advisory service there. So there is definitely a lot of conversation going on in industry at the moment. It's just a matter of how quickly do we make that reality.
Thanks, Divya. Well, I think that brings us to an end. Apologies for slightly failing in my duties as chair and overrunning, but I really hope you found that interesting, and I hope you're all applauding Chris, Meg, and Divya from your homes and offices. Thank you so much. And just before we finish, just a quick final plug from us about our annual conference, which is taking place later in the year, and I do hope you can register and hopefully see you there. And also, if you want to stay tuned to more events in the future, you can sign up to our events newsletter, and nominations are still open for the YEP Awards. So that's a network of professionals who work in energy with 10 years or less experience in the sector. And if you know anyone who you think is doing a great job, you can nominate them for free, which is rare sometimes with these awards. So really hope you consider that. But that's all from me. Thank you so much. And if you've got any questions or feel like there was anything we didn't answer in full detail, you can just please get in touch. Read the report, and yeah, let me know if there's anything we can help. But thank you so much again to Chris, Meg, and Divya, and have a good rest of your days. Bye, everyone.